The mystery of how Princess Diana died has fascinated the world for more than a decade. Was she the victim of an accident or something more sinister? This is the question. A British jury of 6 women and 5 men must decide the answer. This week, 3 coaches carrying the coroner and his jury went to Paris to visit the Alma Tunnel, the place where the car carrying Princess Diana and Dodi Fayed crashed. It is now 10 years since we first saw these shocking images. The wrecked Mercedes. The mourners who came to pay their respects in Paris. The tragic spectacle of the funeral in London. Ten years on, the British inquest finally opened into the deaths of Diana and Dodi. It will cost some £10 million and last 6 months. From the outset, the coroner has been unusually open, releasing much unseen CCTV footage of Diana's last 12 hours. It's now possible to tell the story of that night, frame by frame. The images reveal small details, such as Dodi and Diana holding hands for almost 8 minutes before they got into their car.
I think the footage that's been released by the coroner is actually very compelling because we get a second-by-second almost take on what was happening to Diana just before she died, and in that way it's quite haunting.
Most haunting is what might be the last of Diana's smiles that any camera captured. The coroner produced a list of 20 likely issues that the jury must consider. They range from whether Diana was pregnant, to whether Henri Paul was drunk, to the role of the paparazzi, and letters to Diana from Prince Philip.
William and Harry have said they want the inquest to be transparent and to be as quick as possible. Well, I think if by transparent they mean thorough, there's no doubt that the coroner intends to be thorough. We've seen that already. And as for speed, I think it would be a shame if thoroughness was sacrificed for speed. I think that we've waited this long for it. It might as well take as long as it has to take, particularly if at the end enough people are satisfied that it has reached the truth.
2 years after the crash, the French inquiry, headed by Judge Hervé Stéphan, blamed the driver of the Mercedes, Henri Paul, and said he was drunk. In Britain, a coroner was appointed but died before he started the inquest. The second coroner asked Britain's most senior policeman, Lord Stevens, to investigate. In December 2006, he reported,
"On the evidence available now, there was no conspiracy to murder any occupants of that car."
A few weeks after the report, the second coroner resigned. A third coroner, Lady Butler-Sloss, was then appointed, but as a family court judge, she had a problem with the process.
And there was a suggestion at the outset that Lady Butler-Sloss was not going to have jurors and she was not going to hear it in public. Now that would have been appalling, I think, and that would have added to the conspiracy theories.
When the Court of Appeal insisted on a jury, Lady Butler-Sloss resigned, saying she did not have the necessary experience of working with juries. Last week, the fourth coroner, Lord Justice Scott Baker, finally opened the inquest, legally required when any British citizen dies abroad in unusual circumstances.
I am certain what happened to them. I know they've been murdered, and I'm sure the jury of ordinary people will confirm all my doubts for the last 10 years, which I've been fighting to find justice for my son and Princess Diana.
You have to ask yourself, why are we having this inquest? The only reason we're having it is because Al Fayed is rich and he's been able to manipulate the British legal system, which is one of the fairest in the world. He's been able to manipulate it to his own ends to bring this circus to town.
80 would-be jurors were summoned to the Royal Courts of Justice in London and presented with a questionnaire.
They were asked, are you associated with the royal family, the Al Fayed family, or the Spencer family? Have you been employed by MI5 or MI6? Have you been involved with investigating or reporting on the circumstances of the deaths? Of the 80 people who were questioned here, 25 were deemed eligible to serve and asked to return here on Tuesday.
So 55 were disqualified because they were related to those involved, worked for MI5 or MI6, or had definite views about the case. In Court 72, Lord Justice Scott Baker began dramatically.
You will be in the public eye as no inquest jury has ever been before. We all will. But you must not let that deter you from approaching the facts dispassionately, disregarding anything you hear or have heard outside this courtroom.
Catherine Whitty was Sky's royal correspondent, but now works for Mohammed Al-Fayed. She was in court on day one.
I think there was expectation that something big was going to happen on that first day. But then the coroner began his opening statement, and you could have heard a pin drop, because this wasn't just a brief outline of uncontested facts. He went straight in to talking about the evidence. He went straight into putting across his point of view, quite subtly, but it was definitely there. And I think Mohammed, to start with, was a little bit surprised. Certainly our lawyers were. But it just shows that even on that first day, Diana and her phenomenon and the process around this still has the power to surprise. The coroner spoke about a conversation that happened between Frank Klein, who's the general manager of the Ritz Hotel, and Mohammed Al-Fayed only a few moments after the crash and when Mohammed first found out about the news. And he alluded to the fact that Mohammed then referred to it as murder. And the coroner's own opinion on that was, well, how did he know it was murder just a few moments afterwards?
The key images were captured on 31 of the 43 CCTV cameras in Al-Fayed's Ritz Hotel in the centre of Paris.
So what do we see? We see Diana and Dodi going into a lift. She appears to be fairly happy. Why not? No one's disputing they're not in a relationship. It's what people in a relationship normally do. So they're believing that everything has been arranged. They're going to the back of the hotel to leave to go to Dodi's apartment. They have no idea that minutes later, of course, they're going to be dead.
Of the 20 likely issues the inquest must consider, one has dominated all others.
Whether Henri Paul's ability to drive was impaired through drink or drugs.
Good evening. The Paris prosecutor's office disclosed today that the driver of the car in which Princess Diana was fatally injured had an illegal blood alcohol level. He's said to have been more than 3 times over the French limit and twice the British one.
One of the most intriguing images was shown 4 years ago on Channel 5. At 11 minutes past 11, Henri Paul, supposedly 3 times over the French limit, manages to tie both shoelaces. He squats, switches his balance from right to left foot before standing up unaided.
He looked pretty sober to me, and I think to everybody who was watching that footage. So he certainly didn't look somebody who was intoxicated, and most definitely he didn't look like somebody who was as drunk as a pig as the newspapers reported in the aftermath of that crash.
Lord Stevens' report said Henri Paul was walking around the hotel apparently functioning normally, with no indication he was unsteady. But his verdict was that blood samples that were from Henri Paul did have a high alcohol content. If the jury are not convinced Henri Paul was too drunk to drive, they will challenge all previous judgments. The coroner has already alerted them to what is called a major issue.
Whether evidence has been fabricated to suggest Henri Paul was drunk when he was not.
In the Diana inquest, one of the 20 issues the coroner has highlighted is
whether, and if so in what circumstances, the Princess of Wales feared for her life.
In October 1996, in a letter to her butler, Princess Diana expressed the fear that she would die in a car crash, and it wouldn't be an accident.
I am sitting here at my desk today in October, longing for someone to hug me and encourage me to keep strong and hold my head up high. This particular phase in my life is the most dangerous. X is planning an accident in my car, brake failure, and serious head injury.
And at the inquest, the coroner read out a note of a conversation Diana had in 1995 with her solicitor, the late Lord Mishcon.
I told HRH that if she really believed her life was being threatened, Security measures, including relating to her car, must be increased. I frankly could not believe that what I was hearing could be credible as to this alleged conspiracy, and sought a private word with Commander Jeffson, who surprisingly said he himself half believed in the accuracy of what HRH had said.
It gives you some idea, actually, of how sane she was, if I tell you that she reacted to some of the rumours that were started about her own mental health with humour. I can remember going to a fundraising lunch that she was speaking at and picking up something that had been in that morning's headlines. She said, I hope that I'll be allowed to get to the end of my speech before the men in white coats come to take me away. This, of course, produced lots of laughter.
I can honestly say, as somebody that worked with Diana for as long as I did, and prior to that, I worked with her 2 young sons, I saw Diana as a very level-headed individual, working under extreme difficulties, not least of all because of the public life that she was leading, but also within the framework of a very unhappy marriage. I never saw any evidence of somebody that was unstable, mad, or paranoid.
By July 1997, Diana was out of her unhappy marriage and living a single life. Mohammed Al Fayed invited Diana and her sons to Saint-Tropez in southern France. It was here that her romance with Dodi started. 3 weeks later, Diana went back without her children to join the Al Fayed family on their £12 million yacht, the Jonikal. During the cruise, Diana made very public her new relationship with Dodi Al Fayed. The couple gave great headlines. Princess of the Paradox, Diana yo-yoed between posing for stills and pleading for privacy. On Saturday, the 30th of August, Diana Dodi and bodyguard Trevor Rees-Jones left the Jonikal and arrived at Olbia Airport in Sardinia. There they boarded a private plane. It took off for Paris, where they were met at the small Bourget airport by paparazzi. One was Fabrice Chazery. His pictures caught a moment in history.
Là, on voit Trevor et Keith Winfield qui descendent de l'avion avec des bagages.
The first time the 4 people who would drive in the doomed Mercedes ever met.
Là, nous, à ce moment-là, on était à peu près vers au niveau de la douane. Pareil. Là, on aperçoit Henri Paul.
Dodi was close to Henri Paul, deputy head of security at the Ritz. Henri Paul was a man with a complicated past, and that prompts another of the coroner's key issues for the inquest.
Whether the British or any other security services had any involvement in the collision.
Henri Paul's closest friend told the Stevens inquiry that Paul was never paid by the security services, but he did liaise with them. It was consistent with what he told us in 2003.
Moi, j'ai toujours su qu'il avait des rapports avec les services secrets, mais dans le cadre de son travail. Pas dans un cadre d'aller trahir qui que ce soit, ou de monter des opérations à son compte. C'est complètement, encore une fois, fantaisiste.
C'est ça, c'est le fait qu'il occupe cette fonction dans cet hôtel qui l'a mis en rapport.
Évidemment.
Et anglais?
Mais anglais, de tout, je veux dire...
Tout type de service secret.
Arabe, israélien, tout ce que vous voulez. Je veux dire, à partir du moment où cet hôtel-là n'a pas spécialement une clientèle plutôt qu'une autre.
Lord Stevens said that one of the French secret services confirmed that Paul was known to them and specifically tasked with inquiries in hotel circles. But as for MI6...
We spent 3 weeks, mainly in MI6, looking at the records, being allowed to go where we wanted to go, and examining all of their records in a way that's never been allowed before in this country. And we found no trace of information coming from Henri Paul. We also found no trace in terms of anything that would add and give evidence which would aid the theory of conspiracy to murder and those organisations being involved in that.
On the Saturday, Henri Paul accompanied Diana and Dodi as they visited the Villa Windsor, just outside Paris. It had been owned by the Duke and Duchess of Windsor. Now it belonged to the Al Fayeds.
I think she was aware that she was a potential Duchess of Windsor, a sort of loose cannon who they were going to watch very carefully, and she was not averse to upsetting them, and I think she quite enjoyed how much the affair with Dodi would upset everybody back at Buckingham Palace, as indeed it did, and a bit of in-your-faceness was in her nature.
Diana and Dodi then went to another of Al Fayed's magnificent properties in Paris, the Ritz Hotel. Newly released footage of events recorded here give a remarkable insight into the couple's last hours. At 4:35, they walk through the lobby. Behind them is Trevor Rees-Jones. A minute later, Diana and Dodi come out of the service lift and go to the best suite in the Ritz, the Imperial. 10 years ago, one night here cost £5,000. At 5:40, Dodi leaves the hotel. Henri Paul opens the door to a Ritz car for him. Then Dodi is driven to Repossi, one of the smartest jewellers in Paris, just the other side of the Place Vendôme. What follows highlights two key issues for the inquest.
The circumstances relating to the purchase of the ring, and whether the Princess of Wales and Dodi Al Fayed were about to announce their engagement.
Dodi spends 7.5 minutes in Repossi, then comes back to the hotel with a brochure. He hares upstairs to Diana in the Imperial suite. Dodi dispatches one of the hotel managers, Claude Roulet, to Repossi. He's marked by the red spot. He returns to the Ritz with a bag. Inside are 2 rings. He takes them upstairs to Dodi in the Imperial suite and claims Dodi chooses a gold band, part of the Dis-moi oui or Say Yes to Me range, valued at £130,000. Roulet is seen putting the ring in the Ritz safety deposit box and signing for it. There is a debate as to whether it was really an engagement ring. And there's also debate about the jeweller Albert Repossi's version of events when questioned by Lord Stephen's inquiry team. All matters for the jury to consider. Just before 7 o'clock, Dodi and Diana leave the hotel. Henri Paul sees the car off at the rear exit, and then goes off duty for the weekend, or so he thinks. Neither the French police, nor Lord Stevens, nor MI6, nor the French Secret Services have managed in more than 10 years to solve one of the coroner's other key issues.
Henri Paul's movements between 7 and 10 p.m. on 30th of August 1997.
Meanwhile, Dodi and Diana went to Dodi's apartment at 1 Rue Arsène Houssaye near the Champs-Élysées. They drank champagne. Dodi booked a table at a smart Parisian restaurant for 9:30, but at 9:40 he cancelled because there was a large crowd outside. So they decided to return to the Ritz for dinner, where he said he'd be able to relax. The CCTV says they came into the Ritz at about 10 to 10. Dodi appears to look tense, as it was said the presence of the paparazzi had bothered him. Because the couple have come back unexpectedly, Henri Paul is suddenly summoned back and arrives in his Mini outside the hotel. There's a red dot here to mark him out. This outside camera said it's 9 minutes past 10. When he walks in, the inside camera says it's 7 minutes past 10. There are small discrepancies in all the camera timings.
The CCTV footage actually shown so much. And one of the interesting points that was shown was once Henri Paul had returned to the hotel, we see him very quickly walking in with this air of authority, which he did have, and he goes to the bar. I mean, he's been called back. We don't know exactly by who, but now he's back at work. Before that, he was off duty, doing what we don't know. We have that 2-3 hour period where we don't know exactly where he went.
At 10:20, Dodi is seen talking to duty night manager Thierry Rocher. He later states Dodi outlined a plan to leave the hotel and get back to his apartment. The plan was confidential, but Henri Paul was one of the few who could be told. 5 minutes later, Thierry Rocher is talking with Henri Paul and another member of staff. Paul then waves to the chauffeur who had driven Dodi and Diana back to the hotel. 6 minutes later, Henri Paul talks to one of the drivers again.
One of the key pointers for me in the release of this CCTV footage has been the role played by Henri Paul. And it seems to me that he has a much stronger place in this organisation than either Trevor Rhys-Jones or Kes Wingfield. Now, there's an answer there, of course. Well, Henri Paul was a seasoned member of the Fayed establishment. He'd been at the Ritz for many, many years, and he was halfway up this sort of hierarchical ladder at the Ritz. And so he had this relationship, he had this contact with Dodi. The two security officers, on the other hand, are way down the bottom end, and they're waiting for pieces of information to drop off Henri Paul.
At 10:34, Henri Paul makes the first of what will be 5 trips out of the hotel and into the Place Vendôme, where he spends 7 minutes talking with the paparazzi. At 10:43, Henri Paul re-enters the Ritz and goes to the bar to finish his Ricard, an aniseed alcoholic drink, one of 2 he ordered at the Ritz that night. At 11:10, Henri Paul goes out again to the Place Vendôme. He goes to talk to the driver of Dodi's Range Rover. Then he walks towards the paparazzi. Some people begin to gather round him. 2 minutes later, he's back in the hotel. And this is when he realizes his shoelaces have become undone. The cameras show it takes Henri Paul 44 seconds to tie his shoelaces. Visitors mill around and he talks to hotel staff. From here, he will go upstairs to join the bodyguards outside the Imperial Suite, where Dodi and Diana are.
I must admit, I was extremely surprised when I saw the bodyguards, Wingfield and Rhys-Jones, sitting outside the Imperial Suite. And I was surprised at the amount of activity in the anteroom outside the suite.
One reason they were outside the suite was because they were to be briefed on the getaway plan. It was eventually decided to use 2 decoy cars. Kes Wingfield would leave from the front while, to fool the paparazzi, Trevor Rhys-Jones, Diana and Dodi would leave from the back, with Henri Paul at the wheel. Henri Paul went down the stairs and out to talk to the paparazzi again. It's now 23 minutes past 11. The plan needs 3 cars, Dodi's Range Rover and 2 identical Mercedes, one at the front, one at the back.
Chasing Princess Diana!
The crowd, which is now filling the Place Vendôme and hoping to see Diana, has no clue about all these machinations. This is how one Australian tourist caught it all.
I shouldn't be here, I'll get run over.
At 10 to midnight, Henri Paul makes a 4th trip to the Place Vendôme, where the CCTV spots him standing in front of the large crowd of onlookers and paparazzi. For the coroner, this is the prelude to another key issue.
Whose decision it was that the Princess of Wales and Dodi Al Fayed should leave from the rear entrance and that Henri Paul should drive the vehicle.
This is what Mohammed Al Fayed told us 4 years ago.
Dodi called me was about 12 o'clock. He said, I'm going now to the apartments. And he told me, it's a lot of paparazzi. I don't know what they do. The Place Vendôme is full of people. I told him, please, it's so dangerous. Just stay in a hotel. Everything is there. No need for you to go out. He told me, I think I will follow your advice. Why? After Dodi assured me that he's not going to go out. Henry Paul gone to him at 12 o'clock after Dodi talking to me and convinced him, no problem, we're going to go from the back entrance. Everything is okay. Don't worry, I know the way. And please, because you have already prepared everything there, change Dodi's mind.
But far from changing Dodi's mind, Lord Stevens concluded the decoy car plan had been Dodi's idea all along. Lord Stevens reports that Mohammed Al Fayed told him that Dodi wanted to go back to his apartment for a romantic reason, to give Diana the engagement ring. The jury will have to sift through this evidence and decide the truth. Just after midnight, outside the front of the Ritz, the crowd are waiting. The decoy driver, seen here with a beard, enters the hotel and passes Henri Paul. At the same time upstairs, the bodyguards check the way Diana and Dodi will leave the hotel by the service lift at the back. Downstairs, Henri Paul has his final meeting with the drivers of the decoy cars. 4 minutes later, we see Princess Diana come out of the suite. Diana and Dodi chat to the bodyguard, Kes Wingfield. Although there's been some apparent disagreement with the bodyguards over the plan to get away from the Ritz, there doesn't appear to be any sign of tension. And as they get ready to go, Diana seems to be giggling.
She seemed very relaxed, I think, when she was leaving the Imperial Suite. As she went down into the lift, she's quite jovial, quite jokey with everyone concerned. No one seemed particularly tense.
Kes Wingfield has gone to the decoy cars at the front, while Diana, Dodi, Henri Paul and Trevor Rhys-Jones continue down the corridor towards the service lift. Diana wags a finger at Dodi. She's very playful. Trevor Rhys-Jones is close to Henri Paul, and as he testified to Lord Stevens, he smelt no drink on the driver's breath.
He was at work as far as I was concerned, and he was behaving in a very sober way. There was nothing in his in the way he was that should have said to me that he had been drinking alcohol. If Henri Paul was drunk, then he wasn't driving. That's not just a security professionalism thing, that's just common sense at the end of the day. And if that spoiled the atmosphere, then so be it. That's one of those things. I can categorically say that as far as I was concerned, he was stone cold sober.
Diana and Dodi and the others now wait at what is the tradesman's exit. For Diana, it's a stark contrast to royal routine and Scotland Yard protection.
She expected these decisions to be made for her, like members of the royal family expect these decisions in the security to be made, like prime ministers, presidents. I've worked with every conceivable head of state in the Western world in my life, and they all take that guidance, that steer from their security. Now, on this occasion, it would appear there wasn't this steer, there wasn't this advice.
What we see here suggests just how close Diana and Dodi were that night. Diana's right arm is behind her back, and their fingers are laced together. At one point, it looks like Dodi is nuzzling her neck. Henri Paul goes out to see if their Mercedes has arrived. He appears to wave at one of the paparazzi. Inside, Diana and Dodi are still holding hands. This lasts for 7 minutes, 48 seconds. The princess then mock salutes Henri Paul.
can see her sense of humour in these images, and particularly where staff, servants are concerned. She rightly had a reputation as being somebody who was easy to work with.
At 19 minutes past midnight, the Mercedes finally arrives at the back of the Ritz. Henri Paul, Trevor Rhys-Jones, Diana and Dodi file out to the waiting vehicle. The princess appears to be shielding her eyes. The car moves off. At the front of the hotel, the decoy cars make their move. The paparazzi scramble, realizing they've been fooled. Diana and Dodi, with Henri Paul driving, now have a head start. The chase is on. Princess Diana's final hours were spent in the Ritz Hotel in Paris. Many of her last moments captured on video, just released by the coroner. At 20 minutes past midnight, the Mercedes with Diana was moving away from the Ritz, ahead of the paparazzi.
The last thing I remember, we got in a vehicle, we pulled off, and the couple of paparazzi vehicles that were at the back of the hotel started to follow us.
The shortest route from the Ritz to Dodi's flat is along the Champs-Élysées, but as the Australian tourist video showed, traffic was heavy that night. At the Place de la Concorde, instead of going up the Champs-Élysées, Henri Paul drives straight on towards the embankment of the Seine. The Mercedes should now exit right before the Alma Tunnel, as the red line shows. Once it goes into the tunnel, the Mercedes is heading away from Dodi's flat. We now know that the speed the Mercedes was travelling at was between 61 and 63 miles an hour. The coroner has said
Henri Paul obviously knew Paris, so something caused him to vary the obvious route by going into the tunnel. The question is, why did he go past the exit slip road just before the underpass?
Was the Mercedes blocked from exiting the slip road? One issue the coroner has highlighted is
whether a Fiat Uno or any other vehicle caused or contributed to the collision.
The Paris police found fragments of the rear light of a white Fiat Uno in the tunnel. Had it got in the way of the Mercedes? News reports 18 days after the crash made the link.
The Mercedes wing mirror was found at this point, with traces of another car's paintwork and shards of a Fiat tail light. The Mercedes was thrown into the right-hand wall, then hurled across into the 13th pillar in the middle of the tunnel.
The French police examined 4,668 vehicles, but did not find any Fiat Uno which had been damaged in this way. Al Fayed hired a team of senior retired French policemen, and they claimed to have solved the mystery. In a field, they found this Fiat. Its taillight had just been replaced. And it belonged to a man who had spent the summer photographing Dodi and Diana, James Ondanson. He was one of the most famous paparazzis in the world. He had a white Fiat Uno. And the inquest has raised as a likely issue
whether James Ondanson was in Paris on the night of the collision.
He was the subject of a French television program in 2000.
Une anecdote, c'est une voiture qui a 325 000 km maintenant. Une année, je fais quelques photos de M. Gianni Agnelli à Saint-Jean-Cap-Ferrat. Il se baignait sur son bateau, le Capriccia. Je fais quelques photos de lui. Le lendemain, il me reconnaît. Il revient dans le port de Saint-Tropez et je lui dis j'ai à peu près déjà 200 000 km avec, alors que là j'ai 325 000. Et il me dit l'artiste, quand tu seras à 500 000 km, je te ferai un cadeau d'une voiture.
Ondanson told people he was in the tunnel on the night of the crash. Elizabeth Dard, the widow of one of his friends, told us 5 years ago he had claimed he was at the scene.
Il m'a dit qu'il y était. Il nous a dit qu'il y était. Je suis venu, il a vu l'accident et tout ça. Il n'a pas été pris par la police. Il est parti parce qu'il était malin.
Lord Stevens spoke to Elizabeth Dard and her daughter Josephine and says, "They appear to be truthful witnesses who have nothing to gain by fabricating such a conversation." Nevertheless, Lord Stevens does not believe Andonson's story and concludes he was not in Paris on the night of the crash. A footnote to all this is that Andonson died later in 2000 after setting fire to himself in his own car in a deserted woodland. Lord Stevens added, "There is no evidence whatsoever that he was murdered." The jury will decide if he played any significant part in the crash. Still photographs released by the inquest offer an insight into what was going on in the Alma Tunnel. At 32 minutes past midnight, Dodi, Al-Fayed and Henri Paul were already dead. Princess Diana was in a critical condition and being given first aid by Dr. Maillet, a French doctor who was driving through the tunnel. The pictures address another likely issue.
Whether the actions of the paparazzi caused or contributed to the cause of the collision.
These still pictures show the paparazzi milling around the tunnel. Although Lord Stevens said some might see their behaviour as morally questionable, there was no evidence they did anything wrong. But the first reaction of the French police was to arrest 7 of the paparazzi and keep them in the cells overnight. Many of their photographs were confiscated and were never given back, though every inquiry has found they didn't contribute to the crash. The role of the paparazzi will be considered by the jury. Another issue for them to consider is
whether the Princess of Wales's life would have been saved if she had reached hospital sooner.
The ambulance did not go to the nearest hospital, but to La Petite-Salpêtrière, still a distance of less than 3 miles. It was 1 hour and 43 minutes after the accident when Diana got to hospital. Every inquiry has rejected suggestions that this was part of a conspiracy. Normal practice in France is for paramedics to try to stabilize and treat victims at the scene. By the time Diana got to the operating theatre, she was in a desperate state. The French Minister of Justice and the British ambassador had arrived at the hospital and heard the news everyone dreaded.
Cette nuit, la princesse de Galles a été victime à Paris d'un accident de la circulation à grande vitesse. Elle a été immédiatement prise en charge par le SAMU de Paris qui a effectué la réanimation initiale. À son arrivée à l'hôpital de la Pitié-Salpêtrière, elle présentait un choc hémorragique gravissime, d'origine thoracique, puis rapidement un arrêt cardiaque. Une thoracotomie d'urgence a mis en évidence une plaie importante de la veine pulmonaire gauche. Malgré la fermeture de cette plaie et un massage cardiaque externe puis interne de 2 heures, aucune efficacité circulatoire n'a pu être rétablie et le décès a été constaté à 4 heures du matin.
It was the most tremendous shock, yeah. And yet in some strange way, I think I've written, there was a part of me that felt that it was inevitable, that she never did anything by halves.
It was like being hit with a shovel. It was I don't know how I felt. I think I tried to cry at one stage, but I couldn't make any noise because of the track he was in. But it was just complete shock. It was like a parachute jump. Everything just falls out underneath it.
Lord Stevens, in his report for the inquest, examined claims that the tunnel had been reopened too swiftly and washed down, not helping a forensic examination. These images are from 7 a.m. the morning after the crash, when one journalist went down to the Alma Tunnel.
Vers 7 heures du matin, je suis rentré au tunnel. De l'Alma, au tunnel de l'Alma, parce que je voulais voir l'intérieur. Et je croyais, j'étais sûr que c'était toujours fermé. Mais c'était complètement ouvert. Et ça m'a beaucoup surpris, hein, parce que c'était Diana. Elle était morte. C'était une grande affaire. Et j'aurais pensé que la police aurait fermé le tunnel pendant même plusieurs journées. Mais c'était complètement ouvert vers 7 heures du matin.
Lord Stevens recorded the French traffic police view that the westbound carriageway of the tunnel wasn't reopened prematurely. The green vans went into spray and sweep, and officially the Alma Tunnel was open for traffic again by 10:30 that morning. The coroner decided it would be useful for the inquest jury to see the Alma Tunnel for themselves. No one can remember another time when an inquest jury went abroad to visit the place where people died. The trip had its moments. A policeman came off his motorbike. The wheels came off the coaches carrying the jury, and this was not the only drama of the first week. The coroner has told the jury they will have to consider a surprising development. This time, the man who has to answer the questions is the man who asked the questions on behalf of the inquest, Lord Stevens. The coroner told the jury,
"There is an apparent discrepancy between what Lord Stevens said to Henri Paul's parents when he met with them in Paris on the 8th of November 2006 and what was said in the Operation Paget report a few weeks later."
The Al Fayed team have sensed the importance of the controversy and are demanding answers.
On the 8th of November 2006, Lord Stevens went to Henri Paul's parents and said, "Don't worry, your son won't be found drunk in charge of the car." As we know, a few weeks later, Operation Paget was published, where he said that Henri Paul was 3 times over the drink drive limit, and had he been alive, he'd be prosecuted for dangerous driving. So, there are 3 options to this discrepancy, which is recorded in police notes. He can't deny that the conversation took place. So there are 3 reasons for this. The first is he doesn't know what's in his own report, which, given that it cost £3.7 million of taxpayers' money, is pretty scandalous. The second option is that he lied to Henri Paul's parents, which again is shocking. Well, the third option is something happened between 8th of November and when the Operation Paget report was published to somehow make him change his tune. And that's what the inquests have to address.
We'll have to wait and see what evidence Lord Stevens gives, but it is quite a strange thing for Lord Stevens to have done, because in his report he clearly concludes, Operation Paget concludes, that Henri Paul was drunk.
The coroner said,
"I anticipate Lord Stevens will give evidence that he was trying to reassure Paul's parents that their son had not been drunk as a pig."
One of the other issues the coroner highlighted was explosive, the question that's always been seen as a major threat to the royals.
Whether the Princess of Wales was pregnant.
From the moment she died, there have been questions about whether or not she might be carrying a baby.
Through Diana's last weeks, hours, days and minutes, showing them a series of photographs.
Her bump led to much speculation. The coroner told the jury,
"You will also hear evidence that Diana was taking a contraceptive pill. It is likely that pregnancy is not a matter that can be proved one way or another in scientific terms in this case."
But Lord Stevens has no doubts whatsoever.
The Princess of Wales was not pregnant at the time of her death. Our conclusions were strengthened by forensic tests carried out on blood recovered from the Mercedes car when we brought it back to this country. From the evidence of her close friends and associates, she was not engaged, and she was not about to get engaged.
This is not what Dodi's father believes, but it will be a matter for the jury to judge. Over the next 6 months, the jury will hear many such claims and counterclaims. Inside Court 72 and outside, people will express deep passions and sharp skepticism.
And she wasn't just a princess, she wasn't just some sort of pretty girl who did a bit of charity on the side. And she had an enormous influence, this woman. And that's one of the reasons I get so cross about this inquest, is to think that this is what she's being remembered for, I just think is the ultimate tragedy for Diana.
The public, certainly I feel, and having chatted about it with a few of my friends, feel that, you know, she should just be allowed to rest. There's something fishy about it, for sure, but the fact is it's unlikely that we, the common people, are ever going to know the truth.
The royal family booted Diana out and they stripped her of HRH. There is so much rubbish talked about Diana, and people dismissed her as mentally unstable. It's grossly unfair, and her fears, her very genuine fears into her safety, need to be examined properly in a court of law, and that's why we're all here.
All I'd say is if you do turn up and look at it happen, there is something rather reassuring about seeing the legal process, however long it takes, however expensive it is, however cumbersome it seems to be. There is something reassuring about it. It's definitely given me the sense that once it's over, we will be that much nearer the truth.
I think the inquest will now proceed more slowly. I think there'll be a good look at the forensic evidence. I don't believe that it will be as dramatic as we've had in the opening week or so.
The coroner said,
"The inquests are expected to last up to 6 months.
It will start looking at more periphery stories, which will make headlines in the newspapers, but won't necessarily prove whether Diana was murdered or not. What they will do is muddy the waters and possibly leave the jury open to believe there were questions that are unanswered."
The coroner has told the jury how important these proceedings are.
One of the purposes of these inquests is to investigate the facts thoroughly so that the public suspicion is either dispelled or substantiated. We shall be conducting a vigorous and searching inquiry through the evidence so that the true cause of death may, if possible, be determined once and for all.